Just double checking the stream is coming on. I think it is. I think that's working. Let's just wait for a few more seconds before I get the green light. And yes. Hello, welcome. Welcome to the very first, the very first live coding tutorial in this series. Usually what I do on a live stream is I usually talk about what I get up to as a freelance web and mobile applications developer, but this time I've actually decided to do things slightly differently, and I'm actually doing a live coding tutorial. And what I'm going to be focusing on is JavaScript ES6 features. This is going to be a beginner-friendly course, and there'll be a number of tutorials in this course. We're going to be focusing on a specific feature in ES6 in today's tutorial, and then the tutorials that follow on will also focus on a specific feature of ES6 too. Now, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be doing this every fortnight. So I'll be continuing on my normal live stream discussions next Wednesday, and then the following Wednesday we'll go back to this course. So this course is ES6, as I mentioned, ES6 features in JavaScript. It's extremely beginner friendly. And the tools that I'm going to be using throughout this course are WebStorm. WebStorm is an IntelliJ IDE, and also a bit of the command line as well. So if you're unfamiliar with the command line, then perhaps check out my Linux Bash for Beginners course. I'll provide links to all of this in the show notes below. Yeah, this is completely live. This is completely raw. There's probably going to be a lot of screw-ups, so I do apologize in advance. Yeah, let's just get started. I should say though, before I do start, is I've got a bit of a cold. Therefore, I do probably sound a little bit nasally, so I do apologize. Hopefully I won't sneeze, although I just sneezed before this live stream, so hopefully that won't happen. But I just apologize if I end up coughing, having a coughing fit, or what have you. Anyway, enough of all that grim stuff. Let's just focus on the code. So I'm just going to switch to the IDE here, and we're going to be, there we go. So this is WebStorm. WebStorm is an IDE made by IntelliJ. It's an IDE that is very good for JavaScript. If you're a front-end developer and you're working on JavaScript and HTML, Sass and CSS and all of that good stuff, then do check out WebStorm. I'm not, I mean, it is a paid-for thing. This isn't a sponsored by them at all. It's just something that I really like using. I also use PHP Storm when I'm writing PHP, and I also use PyCharm, which is their Python IDE, whenever I'm dealing with Python. So WebStorm is what we're focusing on today, and I'm probably going to be dealing with some of the command line stuff too. Today's tutorial is focusing on the constants feature of ES6. Now, before I get started, let's just give an overview of ES6. ES6 is an iteration of JavaScript. So when JavaScript gets updated, it usually gets updated through these ES6 feature sets, one of which is ES6, and one of the features of ES6 is constants. Constants is a keyword, or constant is a keyword, and that keyword represents a constant assignment that is immutable. I'm going to be discussing and diving into that in just a second, but let's actually start writing some code. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just create myself a HTML file, which I'm just going to call index .html. Yeah, that's fine. Let's open that up. And I think also, I mean, I'm just making this up as I go. I have a kind of idea in my head how this tutorial is going to pan out, but it probably will deviate. So let's just do a file, which is a JavaScript file. Let's call this base.js. Okay, so here I've got my index.html file and I have my base.js file. The index.html file just simply has this this title, which I'll change to tutorial 1, and I'll put in a pipe, and we're going to say it's constants, because this is all about this tutorial. Okay, so that's going to create us a lovely web page with this title, and I'm going to include, so I'm going to do a link href, whoops, if I can spell it. It's not a link, is it? It's a script. Bear with me, sorry. Script with the src of base. There we go. Okay, so that's now connected to base.js. And in the JS file, we're going to be dealing with our constants. So don't worry too much about all of that stuff that I just did. It's basically just setting up the scene. So we have an index file and we have a base.js file. Now, a constant, let's just talk about what a constant is. A constant is a keyword, a const, C-O-N-S-T, const. It's a keyword in JavaScript. It means that the assignment of whatever that value is immutable, meaning that it cannot change. Once you set it, it cannot change. However, it's the assignment that can't change. It's not the value that can't change. And I'll be talking about that and demonstrating what that means. It's quite different from the constants that you would get in perhaps other programming languages, where it's not only the assignment, but also the value too. If you're a PHP developer or even a Python developer or just another server developer, then you've probably dealt with constants before. And in PHP, for example, you would have a constant value perhaps in a class. So you would have a class, and in that class you would have a constant, const. And that usually is a string that equals something. And you then use self : and then the constant name to then access that constant value. This is very different because we're not dealing with classes in this tutorial. We're dealing with just functional code. So when we're dealing with constant values, we're dealing with the assignment of that. Have I explained that very well? Not at all. But let's just write some code and start getting used to this. So normally when you're in JavaScript and you're creating an assignment, you're using variables, and those variables start with var. Now, obviously, with ES6, there's other types of variables. There's let as well, and that changes the scope. We're not going to worry about that in this tutorial. That's probably next one. So don't worry too much about that. But let's just say var for now. So var, and we're just going to have a variable called width. We're going to equal that to 400. Whoops, like so. Let's save that. Okay, so we have our variable width, and I'm just going to do a console.log, whoops, .log of width. There we go. Okay, so we've set up our a variable called width, and I guess what we could do is have another one called height too. But let's just run this and make sure that this works, mainly for my sake, just to ensure that this is all set up correctly. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to run this. Bear with me just a second. In oops. In a debugger. That be. Bear with me just a second. Let me just set. I haven't set this up yet, so let me just deal with that. It is in here. Tutorials, tutorial 1, constants, base.js. So that apply bug. Okay, good. Right. So let's just double check that you can actually see this as the output. Yes, you can. Okay, good. So this line here is the output of width. So if I did concatenation string, if I did width equals like so, and then ran that again, then you'll see width is equal to 400. Now, I guess what I could do, because I'm not actually doing any breakpoints at this point, I could just run it in the console. So let's just do that too. Okay, fine. That will do for now. I've gone and lost my console run. Is it just run? Sorry, I'm just searching through. Yeah, here we go. I think that's. There we go. Okay, width is equal to 400. So we're out of the debugger. We're into the Node.js console window. That's great. So we've got width is equal to 400. Now, if I wanted to, I could reassign width. So I could do var width is equal to 500. Save that, run this, and we'll get width is equal to 500. So we are reassigning width, the value and the variable width. We could also have width plus width as well, just to add that. Let's not worry about that too much at the moment. But basically, the point that I want to make is that when we're dealing with variables, we can change and reassign not only the value but also the assignment too. So, for example, this could be a string. This could be foobar, and run that. So it's now foobar. So we set it to 400 as an integer. Whoops. Here, and then we went to foobar there as a string. Now you can't do this with constants. Let's change var to be const. And save that. When I run this, I'm going to get an error. So let's run that. And the error is this issue here. It's a syntax error identifier width has already been declared. This is because we are re-declaring what width assignment is. So we've assigned width 400 as an integer here, and now we're reassigning width to be a string, and therefore we get an error. So this is the whole point of constants. Constants cannot be reassigned because the assignment is immutable. However, the value that you are assigning can change. So let's say, for example, let's say this was var, and this was, say this was dimension. You could equal the constant of width to dimension. So let's save that. It's saying it's redundant. That's fine. Let's run this again. We're back with width is equal to 400. So it's the assignment that is constant, not the value that you are assigning. Now, let me just take a cup of Earl Grey, just because my throat is starting to fall apart. And then I'll talk about where these constants can actually be used, what they're actually good for. Okay, so the constants are very handy when you don't want to reassign anything else to that particular to that constant assignment, I guess I should say. So, for example, they're very, very handy when you're dealing with things that just don't change or shouldn't change. So, for example, if you had an application and that application was dealing with a lot of configuration, maybe it was dealing with some API bits and pieces, maybe it was setting bits and pieces up, and it was going through a series of routines in order to return the correct configuration for your application. Well, once that has been done, then you will not want to change and overwrite that configuration value, right, or those values, because with the variables, as I've just demonstrated, you can reassign them, you can change them. You can not only change them from like 400 to 500, but you can also change the type. So you can say, well, var width was 400, but now in this function, var, or at this point in this application, var width is actually a string of foobar. So, and you certainly don't want to be doing that when you're working with values that just should never change. If they are constant values, that shouldn't change. However, you might want to change those values in certain circumstances. So, for example, if you were switching between a production or a staging environment, and so your configuration had different configuration settings, then you might want to flip between the two. However, you won't want to reassign that after those have been set. Now, let's just go and demonstrate that just to show you what I mean. So let's just remove that for now. In fact, let's just remove the whole thing. Let's just create a function that has configuration. Let's just do function, and let's have config. And we're going to return an object literal. And this object literal in JavaScript will just be an object that has perhaps the value, I'm making this up as I go along, URL, like so, and that will be, say, https //howtocodewell.net. And maybe we have also a name just to give it a little bit more. So this is how to code well, like so. So that config routine is going to return an object literal that has URL and name. Okay, so what we would like to do is have a constant, and we're going to call this constant settings. And we're going to, we're going to set that to be the return of config, like so. And then what we're going to also do is just do a console.log of what we have in settings. Okay, so just to recap, what I've done is I've created a function called config, and that function literally just returns an object literal where we have the URL and a name, two parts of this object literal. So the constant will be that object. So bear with me a minute. Okay, so we're going to save that and we're going to run this. Okay, so what we've done is we've returned this here. This is the returned object literal. So we have URL, which is howtocodewell.net, and the name is howtocodewell. Fine. Okay, that's all good. But what happens though if you decide that maybe this is production and you want to have settings for staging or development or your local environment? So what we could do is we could have mode like this, and we could pass in, say, staging like that, and we could have URL. Well, let's do yeah, that's fine. URL is equal to, we're going to set this to be HTTP. We'll just copy that for now, I think, just for ease. Let's change that to be local. Oops. And obviously that needs to be a variable. And we're going to assign that to this. And we're going to do if mode is equal to staging. The URL is equal to, let's say, that dot test. Also, we're going to have if mode is equal to production, then it's .net, like so. So I wouldn't normally do this, right? This isn't how I would set up an application. I'm just using this as an example. Okay, so what we're doing here is in this configuration, we have var URL. We set this by default to be the local URL. So this ends in .local. We then check whether or not the mode is equal to staging. And if that is the case, we set that to .test. If, however, it's production, then we set it to .net, which now means that we can pass in anything we want into here, production, staging, and so on, to alter that. So let's save this. Let's run that to be staging. And we should have changed that to be .test, which we have. So you see that the URL has changed to .test. So that's because we've matched the mode to be staging. Now, in ES6, there is a better way of doing this. Not only is there a better way of writing functions using arrow functions, and also you can have default parameters now. So a lot of this would change. But for now, we're just focusing on constants. But I just wanted to make you aware that there are changes to this, and perhaps we'll be using this as maybe a template for the other tutorials, the future tutorials that I'm going to be doing after this one. So here we have a constant settings, and we're equaling that to the return of staging. Now, imagine if you will, this was overwritten underneath. So let's say that was changed to be, let's do production. Now, let's say this here, up here, let's imagine that this is in a file. Let's just bring this out so you can see it a little bit more. So imagine, if you will, that this was in a file called config.js. And imagine, if you will, that this was in a file called I don't know, base.js. And imagine, if you will, that underneath this was in index.js. So let's say, for example, we were testing some bits and pieces, and we accidentally, so what we did was we imported config.js, and we got our settings from config.js in the base.js, but a developer accidentally overwritten the settings with the config of production, which meant that we were actually, by mistake, working on production. Const prevents those stupid things from happening, because you can't reassign a constant value once it has been assigned. So this is going to throw an error. And if I was to save that and run this, then we get this error. And this error will be const settings config production syntax error, identifier settings has already been declared. Now, if we were to change that to be a variable, and we were to change that to be a variable, and then hit saved, and then run that, it's going to run fine, and we are going to change that to be production. You see that extension has changed from what was it, .test to .net, which means that we have inadvertently reassigned that to be .net, to be production. That is the thing that we are avoiding when we're using constants, because we can't reassign those. We can't reassign a constant once it has been assigned. And yes, there are differences in scopes and other bits and pieces, more of which I'm going to be talking about in the next tutorials. But for now, though, just remember that constants are immutable. And we can alter the value, but we can't reassign it. And that's the whole point. When you're working on a mighty big JavaScript application with lots and lots of files, then the danger before ES6 was that your variables were within a global scope, which meant that you could override variables after you've assigned them. And that was very, very problematic. So having constants allows us to define these things, and it basically allows us to tidy up our JavaScript. It's enforcing rules. So let's remove. Well, I tell you what I'll do is let's just put some comments in. So this will work. And then I'm going to copy that. Let's just do this. Won't work. And change that to be a const, just so we can see. There we go. Okay, so this is example 1. And this is example 2. And I'm going to just save that and run this again, and we'll see an error, and that error is settings, const settings. Settings has already been declared. So that's our syntax error that we've got. I'll just make sure that that is viewable on the screen, which it is. So I think that is where I'm going to leave it tonight. But in the next live stream, we're going to be talking about various other bits and pieces, much like we were talking about before. It won't be a tutorial, it will be a discussion. But after that, we will be picking this up and we'll be looking at other ES6 features. Before I go, though, I'm just going to grab a little bit more tea. And I'm going to just talk about ES6. Because ES6 is if you're a JavaScript developer, then you really need, or a full stack developer like I am, you really need to be getting on board this ES6 train and riding this train, because this is the future of JavaScript. And maybe, like, I don't know, 6 months ago, a year ago, maybe more, I don't know, you would probably need to have polyfills and maybe some frameworks to actually allow you to write these things. But browsers are becoming better and better, which means that you can write all of this stuff out of the gate far easier. Personally, on the projects that I run, I try not to use as many frameworks or libraries as possible, because JavaScript is so good with all of these things now that when you're using libraries just to allow you to use the ES6 stuff, you're bringing in a lot of weight. And so what I prefer to do is I prefer to use polyfills. I use Babel a lot. Babel, I'm not too sure how you pronounce it. And that has the polyfills, and I use Webpack. I'm a Webpack guy, and it allows me to use this. In this tutorial, yes, I had a browser running in the background, but I didn't have any sort of JavaScript magic going. This was purely JavaScript. This was purely running off of the WebStorm and the browser, and there was nothing I needed to do in order to get the const keyword to work as it should work. So, and more tutorials that I'm going to be doing around ES6 in JavaScript will be focusing on the rawness of that feature, and I'll try and avoid as much as possible any kind of things that I have to add and apply in order to get an ES6 feature to work. However, where I know that it won't work, then I'll certainly let you guys know. But anyway, thank you ever so much for watching. If you've got any questions at all, if you watch this after it goes live, do let me know. Put your thoughts down in the comment section below. Now, before I go, I just want to say that there are two discounts that I'm aware of that I can give you guys. This will help the channel out as well, which is fantastic. They are affiliate links. The first one is NordVPN. With NordVPN, it's a fantastic, secure VPN service, and I can offer you a discount which is it's incredible. It's like $79 for 2 years, which is insane. So if you're using I use it in the office here because when I'm out with clients, I want to communicate back to the office, which is fantastic. So do check out NordVPN. Also, another one is Namecheap, and Namecheap have an offer at the moment for a domain name for again, this is nuts. 88 cents. For 88 cents, you can pick up a domain at Namecheap. Both of those are in the show notes below. Do check them out, and I will see you again in the next live stream next week. Thank you ever so much again. Cheers for watching. Happy coding. Bye-bye.